everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today I am doing the latest installment in my Every Now and Then series, The Story of a Shelf. I haven't done one of these in quite some time. I think it's been several months. And even though I have a lovely stash of undone tags, I just did not have the required energy to research and put together a good tag video. And who wants to watch a low energy tag video? Not I, not you. So instead you're getting a low energy shelf tour. How about that? Uh, we'll see how that turns out when I see the views of this video. But it was the research. I just did not have it together to think about the questions and gather the books. And it's just still with the emotional low in the tank kind of feeling going on these days. But let's take a walk through this shelf. And today, instead of drawing one out of the hat, I specifically just picked a shelf where everything across that one shelf is nonfiction. So if you're new to the series, I have a hat and I've numbered off all the shelves in my home library, and I draw a number out of the hat, and then I just do an impromptu little tour of that particular one shelf. Talk about the books there. Have I read them? How did they come to my library? What do I think about them? Etc., etc. And that's it. It's just a very casual, chit-chatty little thing. But today, because it's Nonfiction November, I bypassed the random drawing and I just chose a shelf. And so you can let me know if you've read the books that I'm getting ready to talk about, or if they look interesting to you, or whatever you want to chime in. I love to hear your comments. So without further ado, let's take a look at this shelf. So here's the bookcase we're talking about, and this is a small room. I can't back up far enough to get the whole thing in the one shot. There's a tripod from a failed experiment sitting over there. Up at the top is a set of very old encyclopedias. I think they're from the 30s maybe, that I got at a flea market millions of years ago, and they're delightfully antiquated and outdated and inappropriate. Then we have all of these shelves, some of which are nonfiction. Well, most of it's nonfiction. And we're going to zero in on this shelf in question today. All right, I'm not off to the most auspicious start. I accidentally recorded part of this with no volume, and including the candle lighting ceremony. But now I have lit the candle so as not to curse your darkness, but I put the candle way, can you see it? I put it way up there so I wouldn't accidentally light the top of my head on fire as I narrated this shelf. So I chose this shelf because it's all nonfiction, and it's Nonfiction November. We do have some other nonfiction that is not in this particular room, my library room. There's some in the guest room. We have a bookcase in there that has art books and children's books. So the art books are there, cookbooks in the kitchen, and I don't know what Stephen has out in his studio. But we're not talking about these other shelves. We're talking about this shelf. So let us begin. So the first one, we have Nick Hornby, 10 Years in the Tub, a decade soaking in some great books. So these are book reviews, and I can't remember where these were published. Let's see. The Believer column, Stuff I've Been Reading. So it's like a journal. He does an entry about what he bought versus what he actually read. I hit the off button. What in the world? All right, it was fun at the time when I read it, but I don't know if I'd go back. This is probably something I need to pull and maybe unhaul, because I don't really see myself wanting to go back through it. But I enjoyed it at the time. Mary Wallstonecraft, Vindication of the Rights of Woman. She's probably rolling in her grave right now. Mary, I'm sorry. I need to read that again. Maybe this would be a great one to put on my 2025. Oh, maybe in March. That's Women's History Month, right? You need to revisit this. Used and rare. I guess I don't need to pull out every single book here, do I? This is a couple who accidentally got into book collecting. I think I read a couple of books that they wrote. It just started out with one book that they thought was really neat. I think that they got in a flea market or a secondhand sale, and they did some research, and it just ignited this passion for used and rare book collecting. So they learned as they went. I had a good time reading it. Can't remember much about it, but I remember the general premise. Now we have a couple of books from a time. Well, I still have this enthusiasm, but this was where this would have been around when I was in graduate school, college, graduate school era. Really into artists and writers and that whole collection of people that were in Paris in the 20s. And I started thinking about all these people again recently when I went to the show at the National Portrait Gallery, and it was a show about women in Paris from 1900 through the 30s, and there's a wonderful looking book that went with the show that I really am coveting. But I think my first introduction to a lot of the people that I saw in that show were from these books. So there was this one, Geniuses Together, American Writers in the 1920s by Humphrey Carter. And the one I really loved that I want to read again is Sylvia Beach and the Lost Generation. This was really good. I think I read this first and then I got the other one, but I loved this one the best. Moving right along, we have a book that I got for Stephen. Our books are combined in these bookcases, but Stephen King's book on writing. And this was a booktube guidance selection. I wanted to get him a book about writing because he's been working on some writing. This was last Christmas or the one before? Time is an amorphous construction. But I got him this book, and I feel like it was last Christmas because people were talking about it on BookTube. There's a lot of people on BookTube who are writers, and occasionally they talk about books they've been reading about writing that were helpful to them in different ways. And so I got him this, and he really did enjoy it a lot. Then we have two books that kind of go together by Simon Winchester about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. And I think I read this one first, The Professor and the Madman. And it was about the time when they were forming the first Oxford English Dictionary. They accepted entries from people. They didn't keep them all, but people could submit words and definitions for consideration. And one of their most prolific contributors, who contributed many words and definitions that they actually were able to use, and when they went to, well, that was a dangling sentence, but there was this person. And so then when they went to publish the book and they wanted to honor the contributors, they discovered that one of their most prolific contributors was a man who was, first of all, he was American, but he was in England, and he was in an institution for the criminally insane. And so it's also his story. And then this is a more general book about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. This is a book, okay, I have to show you this book. This is one of those things where you have a great idea, pardon my legs, but then you just don't come through with it. So inside this book, there's an entry for each day, and then there's some bookish stuff in history. And I guess the history doesn't go past 2014. But my idea was I got it, and I am almost guarantee you I got this with Christmas money at some point. And then I was going to read it each day throughout the year. Did I do it? I did not. But now, here it is November, and I'm looking at this book again, so maybe I have a new chance. Maybe I should set this out. Oh, look, a blurb by Ann Patchett. I should set this out and do it in 2025. Read the entry for each day and just enjoy whatever it has to offer me. I'm kind of glad I went through this shelf. I'm not going to reshelve that. I have a plan for that. All right, what else do we have here? Oh, I love this book, A Reader's Delight. Do y'all know about this book? This is a book. I got this as a new release, and it would have been in the late 80s. I think I was in graduate school. It's a bunch of recommendations of lesser known or obscure books. And of course, this was written back before there was BookTube or Bookstagram or the internet even. So from just drawing from his knowledge as a reader, he put together this book of recommendations of books that have been overlooked. And so they're all older books that he recommends. So even though the book itself is old now, I want to read it again because when I read it back then, the things that jumped out at me that I went and tracked down, and I remember finding some in the university library, and I bought some. And I think if I read it now, different books would jump out at me, and I might find a few more hidden gems. But I was going to show you the inside, but it doesn't really come across well. But he has all these different little catchy chapter names, and then he just book talks a certain book. So it's reader's advisory, and it's a lot of fun. Here's one I forget. I always forget that I have this. A copy of Edith Hamilton's Mythology. Whenever I'm coming across mythological references that I need to refresh my memory about, I find I'm well, like everything else, I sort of Google it. But I have this great classic reference. I need to remember that I have this and use it more often because it happens a lot. Okay, if you heard a bad noise, that was the book on the shelf. That was not me. All right, Zelda. Oh, I loved this book. I read this book multiple times during my Fitzgerald heyday. I know there's some good photographs in here somewhere. It is the biography of Zelda Fitzgerald and her life before, mostly during, and after her marriage to Scott. And it has wonderful photographs, and this all fell in with that whole 1920s and 30s obsession and the Sylvia Beach and all that. I wanted a time machine. And Zelda's story is pretty tragic and fascinating. Speaking of tragic and fascinating, here we have a biography of Sylvia Plath. And for some reason, this is separated. I have some journals of hers that came up in a different shelf thing over by the actual poetry. I read this last year during Nonfiction November, Square Haunting, 5 writers in London between the wars. But this is an excellent book. And then we have, okay, this is a shelf shamer, Will in the World. I got this as a new release. It's got to be 20 years old. And that was an earlier incarnation of, I'm going to start reading Shakespeare again because I've always loved Shakespeare. Well, 20 years later, I really did get started. I'm doing it now, okay? I got to it, but I never have gotten to this book. Is it good? Who has read this? Should I read it? Every time there's some kind of tag about the book you've had the longest and never read, here he is. I mean, look at him. Look at him shaming me. My God. We'll go back in there. Here's a recent edition, a Baptist hymnal. Baptist hymnal from Steve Lewis, Faithful Attendance in the Second Grade Choir, 1974 to 1975. Stephen's father is doing, he doesn't know the term for this, but he's doing Swedish death cleaning. He's really been cleaning out a lot of things in his house, boxes and containers and closets, and he's passing different memorabilia on to his children. So this is interesting to me because I did not grow up in a churchy household, but Stephen did, and he actually had multiples of this book from the different years of his good attendance, but this is the representative that we decided to put in the shelves, and it's in really great condition. Here is a Folio Society edition of The Memoir of Jane Austen by her nephew, J.E. Austen Lee. I have not read it, but it's a very pretty little book. I've heard about it because I read a different biography of Jane Austen earlier this year that was written by Carol Shields, and she does reference this book that I haven't read. Here's Creep. Read this earlier this year as well, and I got to see Marian Gerber, the author, at the San Antonio Book Festival, and I really enjoyed her. Oh my gosh, here's another person. She's not in her grave, but she's probably rolling and roiling and really pissed off right about now. And then these are some coffee table books, and these I pull these out and I use them as video proppers. I have a tabletop tripod that I often use at my desk, and I use some of these as risers under that one to get it to the right height, so they're usually not sitting in the shelf when I'm filming a video. But we have the history of clocks and watches, which this has great pictures. I mean, if you just love to look at stuff like this, this is a lovely browsing book. We have the Treasures of the Library of Congress. This could be a whole video just looking at this book. I was just recently there at the Library of Congress. And two books that actually belong to my daughter, and for some reason they're still here at my house. A big book of reptiles and amphibians, and natural history. This is one that we love to look at together, and it has the infamous camel toe picture that I've talked about in a different video. Last but not least, Stephen's book, The Three Stooges Scrapbook. Everything from Sylvia Plath to The Three Stooges. Take your pick. We have a wide range of topics here on this nonfiction shelf, and I hope you've enjoyed this little tour. Tell me what you think in the comments, and it's time for the outro. So there you have it, one of the shelves in my nonfiction book collection. I hope that you enjoyed this little tour today. I hope that you're reading something good and taking care of yourself, and I will be back on Friday for a roundup of this week's reading. Take care. Bye-bye.